Hello and welcome to another Magic Sealed deck building exercise. Today we're taking a look at the newest set, which is Kaladesh. So we've got 6 boosters here, we're gonna open them and then try and build a 40 card deck out of them. And let's get started with our first booster here. Zoom in on our cards. Get things started with a build to smash, and we'll sort the cards by color here. Fragmentize, Weldfast Wingsmith, the Kujar Seed Sculptor, Ambitious Etherborn, Impeccable Timing, Consulate Skygate, Curio Vander, Riparian Tiger, Aradar Express, Wisp Weaver Angel, Morbid Curiosity, Visionary Augmenter, and our rare is a Botanical Sanctum. Alright, let's move on to pack number 2. Where we have Eddy Trail Hawk, Vedalken Blademaster, Takedown, Malfist Squad, Pressure Point, Bastion Mastodon, Welding Sparks, Cogworker's Puzzle Knot, Tidy Conclusion, Demolition Stomper as our first uncommon, Shrewd Negotiation, Girapur Guide, and our rare is a Lost Legacy. And we even get a foil Salivating Gremlins. Alright, on to pack number 3. Start things out with a Reckless Fireweaver, Inspired Charge, Ether Tradewinds, Terror of the Fairgrounds, Highspire Artisan, Ambitious Etherborn, Hunt the Weak, Torch Gauntlet, Doomed Operative, Glint Sleeve Artisan, Voltaic Brawler, Durable Handicraft, Perpetual Timepiece, and our rare is a Depala Pilot Exemplar. Alright, sweet. On to pack number 4. Start things out with a Cathartic Reunion, another Fragmentize, Failed Inspection, Demolish, Wily Bandar, Subtle Strike, Workshop Assistant, Hunt a Week. Another Torch Gauntlet. Another Doomed Operative. Bomat's Bazaar Barge. Inventor's Apprentice. A Whirler Maker. And our rare is a Madcap Experiment. On to pack number 5. We have another Build to Smash, Acrobatic Maneuver, Nimble Innovator, another Seed Sculptor, Thriving Rats, Self-Assembler, Gear Seeker Serpent, Fireforger's Puzzle Knot, Renegade Tactics, Renegade Freighter, Essence Extraction, Foundry Inspector, Restoration Gearsmith, and our rare is a Metalwork Colossus. On to our final pack. Where we have a Hijack, 9th Bridge Patrol, Aether Theorist, Spireside Infiltrator, Attune with Ether, Thriving Rats, Propeller Pioneer, Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, Salivating Gremlins, another Workshop Assistant, Ballista Charger, a Longtusk Cub, Ether Meltdown, and our rare is an Ether Squall Ancient. Alright, so now that we opened all our packs and sorted all the cards, we can go through each color and kind of look at what cards we think are very good, what cards we think are playable, and what cards in that color we would prefer not to play. And that will give us a better idea of which colors are stronger, which have more playable cards in them, because we do need enough cards from each color to build our deck with. Even if one color, for example, has a very strong card but not enough playable cards in general, we might not be able to end up playing that color. So let's get things started with the white cards here, where we have the Pioneer, which is certainly playable. 9th Bridge Patrol I'm less excited about. Acrobatic Maneuver can be fine if you have a lot of enter the battlefield abilities, which is usually the case. Fragmentize, I like to main deck one copy of it, since there are a lot of artifacts and enchantments running around, mostly artifacts. Glintsleeve Artisan is great. Inspired Charge goes into a specific deck. If you can make a lot of tokens and go wide, then Inspired Charge is fine, but in Sealed that's not gonna come up very often, so not a card I'm looking to play in Sealed. Pressure Point is kind of a filler card that you often don't end up playing. Addy Trail Hawk can be serviceable in some decks. Visionary Augmenter is great. Wispweaver Angel is great. Impeccable Timing is certainly playable removal. and the second Fragment Eyes, which I'll put on the side since I don't think I'll play two, but important to keep in mind for the sideboard. So taking a look at white, it looks like a decent color, not the deepest one, but we've got some solid creatures, a bit of removal, so could be one of our support colors, but certainly not a primary color since we don't have a ton of cards in them. So let's move on to blue, where we have Ether Squall Ancient, which is a very good win condition and can be something you can build around if you have a lot of energy, for example. So that's an exciting card. I will put it kind of on top here. Ether Meltdown is also a very good removal spell for just 2 mana. Also one I'm excited to play with. Ether Theorist is also a very good blue common. Same with Gearseeker Serpent, although you do need to work a bit to make the Serpent a bit cheaper. Nimble Innovator is a fine blue card. Failed Inspection is not a card I'm excited to play. Is more of a sideboard card in slow matchups where you think a counterspell is going to be good and you'll have the mana to play it, but otherwise I'm not looking to play this one in sealed very often. Ether Trade Winds is a fine playable. Shrewd Negotiation is exciting if you have a lot of ways to make servos, for example, or have a lot of other artifacts that you don't mind giving to your opponent in exchange for their best artifact or creature. So a very good card as well. Vedalken Blade Master is fine filler. Curio Vendor is not a card I would like to play. And Weldfast Twingsmith is also a playable card, although not super exciting. So taking a look at blue, we've got some exciting cards here that I would very much like to play. And then some fine filler cards with mostly creatures, which is a good thing because blue usually doesn't have a lot of decent creatures. So blue also similar to white, although there's a few more exciting cards here. Although I guess, to be honest, I could also put the Wispreaver Angel and the Visionary Augmenter in this category of more exciting cards, since they can be very powerful. And moving on to black, we have Thriving Rats, which is just fine, never very exciting, but if you need a black 2-drop, he'll do. We've got Essence Extraction, which I'm actually happy to play with, since it's a pretty decent removal spell. Dune Operative is also very good. Subtle Strike is also a card I'm happy to play. Another Dune Operative, Ambitious Aetherborn. Lost Legacy we're never gonna play in Limited. Tidy Conclusion is a fine removal spell. Malphus Squad is playable. Morbid Curiosity is more of a sideboard card. It can be good in certain slow matchups, but also not a card I'm looking to main deck in sealed. And Ambitious Aetherborn. So taking a look at black, we see lots of creatures, double Ambitious Aetherborn, double Dune Operative, double Thriving Rats, and then some removal in Tidy Conclusion, Subtle Strike and Essence Extraction. So black looks pretty decent and pretty deep, although doesn't have a big balmy finisher like blue has, for example. Let's move on to red, where we have Salivating Gremlins, which is fine if you have enough artifacts. Spireside Infiltrator is just fine if you have vehicles, for example, he becomes a lot better. Hijack is not really a main deck card unless your deck is hyper aggressive, which in sealed is not gonna come up very much. Renegade Tactics is a filler card, but often doesn't make the deck. Build to Smash is fine. Madcap Experiment, another one of those rares that you're never gonna play in sealed, or limited for that matter. Inventor's Apprentice is fine if you have some artifacts. Demolish, not a card I'm looking to main deck, a little too expensive for artifact removal, and destroying lands is not something you should be doing, but can be a sideboard option. Cathartic Reunion can be a playable card. Then we have Terror of the Fairgrounds, which is not a great card, although you could still end up playing it. Reckless Fireweaver is playable, better again if you have a lot of artifacts, of course. Same with the Gremlins. Welding Sparks is actually a card I'm excited to play since it's a very cheap and efficient removal spell. And another Build to Smash. So taking a look at the red, We've got the 2 Salivating Gremlins, we've got the Fire Weaver and the Inventor's Apprentice. So all of these cards really care about artifacts. And then we've got the Build to Smash, which wants to be in an aggressive deck where you can use the Pump Spell profitably and preferably use it on an artifact creature. So red doesn't look too inspiring. The only card I'm interested in is the Welding Sparks, to be honest. And that's even a splashable card, so if we have enough mana fixing, mostly in green that's going to be the case, then we could end up splashing the Welding Sparks since it's only single red. Otherwise we would need a lot of artifacts to make our red cards work, which I'm not sure we have, but we'll see. Moving on to green, we have Longtusk Cub, which is a very good card if you can land it on turn 2. Attune with Ether, fine fixing, and if you have an energy theme, always happy to play this one. Seed Sculptor is fine, Hunt a Week is a good removal spell in this set. Wily Bandar is not a card I'm looking to play. Durable Handicraft is not a card I was super excited about at first, but actually a playable card. Hunt a Week again, Highspire Artisan is playable, and Girapur Guide also playable. Takedown, more of a sideboard card. Riparian Tiger is fine, and another Seed Sculptor. So taking a look at green, we've got 2 removal spells here in Hunt a Week, and then some solid creatures in double Seed Sculptor. We've got a Tiger. So green looking alright with the 2 removal spells and solid creatures, but also no card that really jumps out as a card we should be playing. Taking a look at our gold cards, we've got Depala, Voltaic Brawler and Restoration Gearsmith. All these cards are great if you're in those respective color combinations. And then the artifacts, which is a big pile here on Kaladesh. Ballista Charger is a fine vehicle. Workshop Assistant, only a card I'm looking to play if we have a very grindy black-white kind of deck with a lot of artifacts, of course, but not a card I'm usually gonna end up playing. And Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, also not a card I'm interested in unless we have got a lot of energy cards that we want to enable. Metal War Colossus is an interesting one, goes nicely with expensive vehicles like the Ballista Charger we just saw, but also requires a specific deck to be good in. You can't just throw this in any deck and expect it to work. Foundry Inspector is fine. Renegade Freighter is an exciting common and of course goes well in an aggressive deck. Fireforger's Puzzle Knot, more of a sideboard card. That's if you see a lot of one-toughness creatures you can side in if you're a red deck. Self-Assembler is good if you've got multiples, and taking a look here, we only have 1 copy, so then I'm not really interested in playing this one. So Whirler Maker can be a nice mana sink for the late game. If you've got nothing else to do with your mana, you can just make a 1/1 Thopter. But it is very slow to get started here. 3 mana to play the Whirler Maker, 4 mana for the first Thopter, that's 7 mana, which is a lot for just a 1/1 flyer. So usually I'm not gonna end up main decking this in Sealed, even though Sealed is said to be a slower format than Draft. It's still gonna usually be pretty fast with all the high quality creatures in Kaladesh. So this is still more of a sideboard card I think in Sealed, but a very good one if the games do drag out and you've got a lot of mana to work with. We've got Beaumont Bazaar Barge, which is also a fine vehicle. Torch Gauntlets, not a card I'm super excited about, but some decks could end up playing 1. Another Workshop Assistant. This Perpetual Timepiece is not a playable card. Another Torch Gauntlet, I'll put this one in the playable pile. Demolition Stomper is one of the few unplayable vehicle cards in my opinion. Just takes a bit too much to crew it, and it's a bit too expensive to really get going. Cogworker's Puzzle Knot, not super exciting, but if you're white and you need to go white and have, for example, an inspired charge deck, could be playable. Bastion Mastodon is a fine playable. Aradar Express is the other vehicle that I'm not too interested in, since it's also pretty expensive and the crew cost is pretty high compared to other vehicles. And Consulate Skygate can be fine if you've got a pretty slow dirtly deck, but that shouldn't be the case most of the time, so not a card I'm looking to play. So taking a look at our artifacts, don't have a ton of them. We've got the 3 vehicles here, Renegade Freighter, the Ballista Charger and the Bazaar Barge. These are all playable, and most sealed decks are gonna want about 2 or 3 vehicles, so this is a decent amount. We've got Bastion Mastodon, which is playable even if you're not in white, since a 4/5/4/5 enables some artifact synergies, is still pretty decent, but of course better if we're playing white. Torch Gauntlet goes more into the aggressive red decks, which I don't think we will end up in. Whirler Maker, slow grindy card. Foundry Inspector, a nice filler if we've got a few artifacts, can make them cheaper. And then the Colossus, which could go nicely into a slower deck if we're playing these vehicles, because then he becomes quite reasonable. If we've got, for example, the Bazaar Barge, then he costs 7. If we've got Ballista Charger in play, he only costs 6 to play. Foundry Inspector can also make him a bit cheaper. So yeah, maybe this package could work in one of our decks. So now that we've looked at all the cards, we can try and look at what color combination we could play. So for example, we've got this Depala Pilot Exemplar. So if we want to try and build a red-white deck, we can see how that would look like, since we do have a few vehicles to synergize with Depala. So yeah, let's get started with a red-white deck, and then afterwards we can try and explore some other color combinations and see how they look. So I'll be right back. Alright, welcome back. So this is how the red-white deck would look like. We've got a decent curve here of creatures, a bit low on the 2-drops. We've got a lot of the powerful white creatures. We've got Wisweaver Angel to synergize with all our Fabricate cards. We've got a decent number of vehicles to go with Depala. Lots of artifacts to go with our artifact synergies. For removal, we've got Fragmentize, Impeccable Timing and Welding Sparks, so a bit on the low side here. Could also include the Metalwork Colossus, since we are playing with the 3 vehicles, and that makes him a little more castable and gives us some inevitability, but I could see not playing him and playing something else instead. Right now this is 22 cards and we would like to play 23, and we've got a few options for the last card. We could play Whirler Maker, which is slow, but can trigger cards like Salivating Gremlins over and over, so could be a card we want to play in this deck. Acrobatic Maneuver is fine, since we have a decent number of Fabricate cards to synergize with, although we do have a lot of 3-drops already. Fireforger's Puzzle Knot is a card we could play as another artifact to enable some of our synergies. Is kind of a removal spell, so would fill some of those roles. Torch Gauntlet, also a card as another artifact to enable artifact synergies, and we are kind of an aggressive creature deck in a way, so could be fine, although we do risk having lots of these vehicles and equipment that don't do anything if we don't have the creatures to go with them. Terror of the Fairgrounds is not a great card, so I would prefer not to play this one. Cathartic Reunion could smooth out some of our draws, but can be a dead card later in the game when you don't have the cards to discard to the Reunion, so you need to wait until you draw enough lands to discard to the Reunion, for example. But I could see playing it just to smooth out our draw. The second copy of Build to Smash I'm less excited about than the first copy, but I could still see playing it, since we do have a lot of cheap creatures, and the Fabricate cards will make servos that synergize nicely with the Build to Smash. Renegade Tactics is kind of a filler card, since it just cycles and draws as a card, so I could just see playing this as a filler card. Second Fragmentize, also less excited about than the first copy. Pressure Point is just filler. Inspired Charge could be very powerful. If you have a lot of the Fabricate cards, you can make lots of tokens, go wide, play Inspired Charge, and then basically win the game. But just having one copy makes it a bit less reliable, so it's not like that's always going to work out. So I'm also not that much of a fan of just one Inspired Charge in this deck. And then 9th Bridge Patrol could also be playable, but is usually a bit underwhelming. So we've got a lot of options here, and whatever card we don't pick in our main deck, we can still have in our sideboard. So for example, if we are facing a grindy matchup, we can just side in cards like Whirler Maker. If we see a lot of 1 toughness creatures, we can side in the Puzzle Knot. So we have a lot of flexibility here with our sideboard, which is nice. So this is the red-white deck. Moving forward, we can take a look at maybe another deck like red-green, since we do have the Hunter Weeks and a decent curve of creatures in green. For example, 2 Seed Sculptors would fill the curve out nicely here. So we can maybe take a look at how a red-green would look like. So I'll be right back. This is more or less how the red-green deck would look like. As you can see, our curve is a lot lower. We've got a lot of nice 2-drops here, and the Longtusk Cub Voltaic Brawler gives us some energy themes, and the Seed Sculptor is a solid 2-drop. We also have the Tiger as another energy card. For removal, we've got Welding Sparks and double Hunter Week. Still playing the vehicles in this build, and Metal War Colossus still goes nicely with those vehicles. And for the last card, we could be playing something like Whirler Maker, which does look a little more appealing in this build than it did in the red-white build, just because the curve in this deck is a little lower, so we can afford to play a slower card in this deck, I think, and would also keep triggering cards like Salivating Gremlins and give us a bit of a win condition in the air with all the top tier tokens it makes, and also would make the Colossus cheaper, for example. And we are playing with Attune with Ether in this deck, which not only gives us a bit of energy to go with the few energy creatures we have, but also looks for a land. So we could be playing this over a land, since it basically counts as a tap land as long as you have enough green sources in your deck. But it could also give us access to a 3rd color, and we did also open a Botanical Sanctum, so it would be pretty easy to splash a blue card in this deck if we wanted to. Just play an Island, a Sanctum, and then Attune. That's already 3 blue sources, that's pretty much for free. So taking a look at the cards we could splash in blue, I found Ether Meltdown, which is a cheap removal spell that also makes some energy to go with our energy creatures, and Shrewd Negotiation, which we don't have a ton of expendable artifacts we can give to our opponents, since we don't have as many of the Fabricate cards in this deck as we would have in, for example, blue-white. So I'm not that convinced that Shrewd Negotiation is going to be great in this deck. Ether Meltdown could be fine, but at this point, splashing blue for just 1 Ether Meltdown might not be worth it, since we are going to draw that island at some point when we have a Voltaic Brawler in hand that we want to play on turn 2. So I think at that point we might as well not splash any blue cards, so we would just be red-green, and at that point I would probably just put in the Whirler Maker to give us some late game inevitability, and to also synergize with the Colossus, I guess, which is our other inevitability card in this deck. So yeah, taking a look at red-green, it doesn't look bad. Don't have a ton of removal, only the Welding Sparks and double Hunter Week, but our curve is relatively low, so we can steal some games against slower opponents, and we still have the vehicle package that can punch in for a lot of damage in a later game. So yeah, I don't hate the look of this deck. The only downside here is that we have relatively few energy cards, just a Cub, Voltaic Brawler, Riparian Tiger, and Attune with Ether, so the energy creatures are not going to be super exciting in this deck. Also the Salivating Gremlins, we do need a way to keep triggering them, and it's not like we have as many artifacts in this build as we did in red-white, so maybe we can take a look at some other color combinations and see how they look like. And given that we want maybe some more removal, black had a decent amount of removal in it, as well as some other energy creatures, so maybe black-green could be a color combination we want to look into. So I'll be right back. So this is how the black-green deck would look like, and as you can see, our 2-drops are pretty stacked, which is a good thing since that means we'll consistently have a 2-drop on turn 2, which is where we want to be. And besides the green energy creatures, we also got 2 copies of Thriving Rats, which do get better if you have more energy cards to go with them, since we still have the Attune, the Longtusk Cub, the Riparian Tiger. Then we also have a lot more removal than previous builds, since we have Subtle Strike as combat trick / removal. We've got Essence Extraction, Double Hunt a Week, and Tidy Conclusion. And still the 3 vehicles for the late game. And we also still included the Metalwork Colossus, since he does go nicely with the vehicles and gives us another big late game card. Taking a look at some other options, we could also be playing Durable Handicraft, which does look a lot better if your curve consists of mostly 2-drops, since then it's easier to pay that additional mana to put a +1/+1 counter on them. So I do think Durable Handicraft looks pretty good in this deck, so I could probably see including it. Not sure what I would cut for it. We also have a second copy of Ambitious Aetherborn. Would give us another way to make an artifact with Fabricate, since we do have these 2 Doomed Operatives which would like to have an artifact, but I don't think we need another 5-drop in this deck. So what would we take out for the Durable Handicraft? There's a few cards that aren't super exciting. The Girapur Guide, for example, not super exciting, but it is a 3-powered creature that can crew our Bazaar Barge and the Ballista Charger. So I might just take out the High Spire Artisan, since it's not a super exciting card, although it does give us a creature with reach to fight creatures with flying on the other side. Could also just take out a Thriving Rat, since it's probably still the least exciting 2-drop in the deck. But there's a few options here. Could even take out the Colossus if we're facing an aggressive deck. And we do still have some sideboard options. Don't have to forget cards like Takedown in the sideboard, Morbid Curiosity if we're against a slower opponent and we could use some extra cards. Although we don't have a lot of expensive creatures to sacrifice, so probably not the best card in this kind of deck. So this was black-green. We can take a look at some more builds here, since Kaladesh has a lot of playable cards, so we will often have multiple playable color combinations, and depending on your matchup you could even side into a completely different color combination according to what you need in the specific matchup. So let's take a look at some other color combinations here, and I'll be right back. Alright, welcome back. So this is how the black-white deck would look like, and it's pretty nice since we get to play with Restoration Gearsmith, which is a nice grindy card advantage card. We still have all the vehicles in this build. We have a decent amount of 2-drops. Eddy Trailhawk and Thriving Rats are the only energy cards in this deck, which is a pretty low amount, but they still work with each other and by themselves just fine. Don't have a ton of 3-drop creatures here, have a lot of 4-drops, so our curve looks a little awkward. We do have a decent amount of removal in Fragmentize, Impeccable Timing, Subtle Strike as kind of a combat trick / removal spell, Essence Extraction and Tidy Conclusion. Still like the Metalwork Colossus to go with the 3 vehicles, but this deck takes less of an advantage of the vehicles, since it's trying to be less aggressive than previous decks, which means the vehicles are going to be less impactful than they are in some of the other builds. Our curve also looks a lot higher, so this might not be the best home for the vehicles. Still get the Wispweaver Angel to go with all the Fabricate cards. Can even flicker the Restoration Gearsmith, which is pretty nice. So this deck doesn't look bad. It looks to be a nice grindy deck with a decent late game. Still have a lot of sideboard options, like for example our Acrobatic Maneuver looks decent in this kind of build. Can also still play a grindy card like Whirler Maker, but our deck is already pretty grindy, so I don't think we need the addition of Whirler Maker, at least not in the main deck. So the deck doesn't look bad, but overall I think I prefer the black-green build, just because It's a little more aggressive, takes better advantage of the vehicles, puts more pressure on the opponent. And then after sideboard, we could just transform into a completely different deck. Once the opponent lowers their curve, we can turn into a bit more of a mid-rangey grindy deck, and then something like black-white would not be a bad strategy. So we do have that flexibility in our seal pool, since basically all our colors were pretty playable. The only color I think is a little too shallow is blue, since we don't have a lot of good blue cards. Ether Meltdown, Aether Squall Ancient are fine. The Gearseeker Serpent does want us to play a lot of artifacts, but doesn't really synergize with the vehicles, since those are all expensive cards. Shrewd Negotiation kind of needs to go with, I think, the white cards, where we have the most Fabricate cards and we can just give our opponents a servo token, but I don't think blue-white would be a great color combination. Alright, so I think that's gonna do it for this video. I wanna thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.